31 feet down, the water off the fuel dock isn't black. Black would be a mercy. It's brown-green and thick with silt, and my flashlight beam died about 8 inches past the glass of my mask. I was breathing slow, the way you learn to when panic costs money, and I was running my gloved hand along the bottom searching for a metal box my uncle had sworn, under oath, in front of a judge, did not exist. I'm a salvage diver. I've pulled engines, anchors, 1 Cadillac, and 2 drowned men off the floor of this harbor. That night I was diving for the truth about my own family, and I remember thinking, with my knees sunk in the mud my father's Marina was built over, that nobody ever tells you the truth is heavy. It is. It has to be lifted like anything else, but that came later. To understand the dive, you have to understand what I came home to. My name is Casey Merritt. I'm 41, and I run a salvage tug out of Harlow Bay, Washington, a working harbor town where everybody knows your boat before they know your face. Last October I took a 3-week contract towing a derelict seiner down from Alaska. Cell coverage up there is a rumor. I called my father, Walt, from Ketchikan before we lost signal. He told me the Chinook were late and that his hands were bothering him, and I said what I always said. I'll deal with it when I'm back. That sentence was my whole strategy for handling my father getting old. Stay at sea. Deal with it later. I'd already missed my mother's last 4 months the same way, telling myself the next contract was the one we couldn't turn down. Some people run from things on land. I just made sure land was never where I was. 22 days later I came around the breakwater and knew something was wrong before I touched the dock. My father's truck wasn't in its spot. It was always in its spot. And on the chain-link gate to the boatyard, against 40 years of rust, hung a padlock so new it still had the shine on it. My key didn't work in the office door either. Through the window I could see my father's desk, his Tide calendar, the little monitor for the security cameras he'd installed years ago after somebody kept siphoning fuel, an old DVR unit blinking on the shelf like nothing had changed. Everything in that room was his. And I was locked out of it. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called my Uncle Denny, who had kept the Marina's books since before I was born, and got a message saying my number could not be connected. Blocked. It took me a second to even understand the word, "Let me tell you about Denny, because you'd have liked him." Everyone did. 68 years old, reading glasses on a cord, remembered every kid's name on the dock and every widow's slip fee he'd quietly waived. Walt built the Marina with his hands, Denny kept it alive with his ledgers. That's how the town told it. My whole childhood, there's one photo of the two of them together, and Denny isn't in the frame so much as behind it, half turned. At the ledger desk, watching my father get his picture taken, I was still standing at the locked gate when a man in a windbreaker came down the ramp and asked if I was Casey and Merritt. He put an envelope in my hands and left like he'd been waiting nearby. Behind him, up by the bait shop, I saw my cousin Brett, Denny's son, 39, a guy I'd taught to tie a bowline when we were kids, watching the whole thing. When I looked at him, he studied the pavement like it owed him something and walked away. The envelope said my uncle was petitioning the court for permanent guardianship of my father. That's how I learned Walt had suffered a major stroke. Not from a phone call. From an exhibit list. I found him at a place called Cedar Pines, a low brown building off the county road that smelled like disinfectant losing an argument. My father, the man who once freed of under a fouled prop in January because he didn't want to wait on me to gear up, was in a wheelchair by a window that faced a parking lot. The stroke had taken his right side and nearly all of his speech. But his eyes found me the second I came through the door, and his left hand shot out and gripped my sleeve with a strength that made a nurse look over. He worked his jaw. He fought for it, fought the way I'd watched him fight weather his whole life, and what came out was one broken syllable, over and over. D. He couldn't land the rest. A tear went down the still side of his face, the side that couldn't feel it, and I told him it was okay, and that was the first lie I ever told my father. That night, in my truck in the Cedar Pines lot, I finally looked at my call log from the night of his stroke. September 30th, 6 missed calls from his cell, between 7:40 and 7:50 p.m., while I was somewhere north of Dixon Entrance with no signal and no idea. And one voicemail, 41 seconds long, that I had not been able to make myself play. I put the phone face down on the seat. I wasn't ready. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't ready, so I read the petition instead, every page, by Dome Light. It said my father was incapacitated and without family able or willing to care for him. It said I was absent, unreachable, estranged. It used the word abandoned. I sat with that word doing its work on me, because the worst accusations are the ones with a splinter of truth in them, and then I reached the signature page and stopped feeling sorry for myself entirely. The filing date was stamped in the corner. October 3rd. Nobody had told me my father was in a hospital until October 5th. My uncle went to a courthouse and swore my father had no one, 2 full days before anyone let me know there was anything to come home for. The town found out before I did what kind of story this was going to be. Denny wrote a guest column in the county paper the following week. He never mentioned my name. He didn't have to. He wrote about the burden of caring for a beloved brother while some family members chase paychecks up and down the coast, about hard choices made alone, about how a community steps up when blood doesn't. It was beautifully done. Humble. Wounded. The Harlow Bay community page did the rest. I made the mistake of reading the comments exactly once. She shows up now that there's a Marina to inherit. Denny's been holding that place together for decades. Somebody said they'd seen me at Cedar Pines making a scene, which was interesting, because what I'd actually done was cry quietly in the parking lot where I thought nobody could see. By the end of the month, 4 boat owners had pulled their vessels from our yard. One of them, a man whose kid I'd towed off a sandbar for free, wouldn't meet my eyes at the fuel pump. My whole life, my answer to conflict has been the same. Go quiet. Go to work. Let the weather pass. I'd have done it again, endured it like a long crossing, if a friend from the harbormaster's office hadn't slipped me a name. June Okafor. 26 years investigating financial crimes against the elderly, retired to a house on the bluff, still sharp enough to cut yourself on. She met me at her kitchen table with reading glasses and a magnifying loupe, and she let me talk for 10 minutes before she said the thing that changed my posture for the rest of this fight. You're being quiet because you think the truth speaks for itself. In a town this size, silence reads as guilt. He's telling a story. Right now, you're a character in his. You need to start building yours, with paper. Then she did something nobody else had done. She actually read the exhibits. Attached to Denny's petition was a durable power of attorney, supposedly signed by my father 14 months earlier, giving Denny authority over everything, the marina, the house, the accounts. June laid it flat under the lamp and studied the signature through her loupe for a long, silent minute. Then she slid it across to me. Look at the pen pressure. A real signature speeds up and slows down. This one's the same weight the whole way through, and there's a hairline shake in the long strokes. That's what a hand looks like when it's tracing, not signing. It's too perfect. Real signatures are a little ugly. There was more. The document had been notarized by a woman named Sandra Teague, a mobile notary out of Ridgeline, with a date in August of the previous year. June had me pull my father's medical records. As his daughter, I still had access to the patient portal Denny apparently hadn't thought to lock me out of, and there it was in the appointment history. On the date Sandra Teague swore she'd watched Walt Merritt sign in Harlow Bay, my father was 40 miles away in Everson, getting an echocardiogram. Check-in 9:12 a.m. Discharge 2:40 p.m. The notary certificate said 11 a.m. A man cannot sign a document in one town while lying on a cardiology table in another. I thought that meant it was over. June smiled the way people smile at beginners. Proving it, she said, was a different ocean. The marina and the house hadn't just been claimed, they'd been transferred into something called Tidegate Holdings LLC, and when we pulled the state filing, Denny's name appeared nowhere on it. Just a registered agent, a commercial service out of Spokane that existed to be a name on paper. Our records requests to the bank came back needing authorization from, of course, the attorney in fact. The system had a lock on every door, and my uncle was holding the ring of keys he'd forged. I drove to Ridgeline to talk to Sandra Teague myself. Mistake. She opened her door about 8 inches, and when I said my father's name, I watched fear move across her face like a cloud shadow, not confusion, not annoyance, fear, before she said she had nothing to say to me and shut the door hard enough to rattle the glass. June scolded me for going, then wrote Sandra's name at the top of a list and underlined it twice. Scared witnesses, she said, are witnesses. I tried Brett too. I found him replacing zincs on a gillnetter at the public dock, and I didn't accuse anybody. I just asked him what he knew about the night of the stroke. He kept his eyes on his work and gave me the family line. His dad had stopped by the office that evening. Found Walt on the floor, called the ambulance, rode with him, held his hand. He was wrecked, Casey. You weren't there. But when I asked what time all that happened, his hand slowed. He didn't know. He'd never asked. And something in the way he said it told me the question was going to follow him home. Meanwhile, a hearing date arrived in the mail, and with it, a new motion. Denny was asking the court to restrict my visits to Cedar Pines, supervised, 1 hour a week, citing reports that my presence agitated the ward. The cruelty of it was surgical. The 1 hour I did get, a nurse named Marisol walked me out afterward and stopped me at the door. She said she probably shouldn't say anything. Then she said it anyway. Every day, visiting hours, he watches that door. 2 to 4. He doesn't watch the TV. He watches the door. She looked at me. Whatever he's waiting for, ma'am, I don't think it's his brother, so I stopped grieving and started working. I built the case the way I'd plan a salvage job, chart the wreck, find the lift points, know your tides. A binder. Timelines. The echocardiogram records. The LLC filing. Sandra Teague, underlined twice, and then, on an ordinary Thursday, my phone finished syncing 3 weeks of backed up data in the truck, and the screen lit up with the one thing I'd been diving around for a month. Voicemail. September 30th, 7:48 p.m. 41 seconds. I drove to the boat ramp, where the water has always done my thinking with me. Dusk was coming down gray and even. I sat on the tailgate, the tide moving under the pilings, and this time I pressed play, 41 seconds. Most of it wasn't words. It was fumbling, the phone knocking against something hard, my father's breathing gone wrong, ragged, uneven, like a man trying to lift something too heavy from underneath. Then fragments, slurred and broken. My name, or half of it. And then 2 things that came through clear enough to stop my heart. His brother's name. Denny. And one whole word, fought for in one, the last complete word I have from my father before the stroke took the rest. Ledgers. I sat on that tailgate until it was full dark, playing it again and again while the tide worked under the ramp, and by the 4th listen I understood I wasn't just hearing my father having a stroke. I was hearing what he was doing when it hit him. He wasn't alone in that office. He was saying his brother's name to his brother. I brought it to June the next morning. She listened once, wrote down the timestamp, 7:48 p.m., September 30th, and then did something that hadn't occurred to me. She requested the 911 dispatch record. Public agencies keep what's called a CAD log, every call stamped to the second. It took 9 days to arrive, and when she laid the printout on her kitchen table next to my phone, she didn't say anything. She just put her finger on the line and let me read it myself. Call received, 8:56 p.m. Caller, Dennis Merritt. Caller states he arrived at the Marina office and just found his brother unresponsive on the floor, 68 minutes. My father went down at 7:48 with his brother's name in his mouth. Help wasn't called until 8:56. And the man who made the call told dispatch, told the paramedics, told his own son, told the whole town, that he'd only just walked in. 68 minutes is not a delay. At sea we have a phrase for the window when a rescue is still a rescue. After that window, you're doing recovery. Every stroke pamphlet in the Cedar Pines lobby says the same thing in bigger letters: time is brain. The neurologist June consulted for the case put it in one flat sentence I've never been able to unhear. With treatment beginning an hour earlier, it is more likely than not that significantly more speech function would have been preserved. Denny didn't just take the Marina. He took my father's voice. And the word my father spent his last clear moment saying told me why: ledgers. June and I rebuilt that night like a wreck survey. The commercial dumpster at the Marina gets emptied Thursdays. The stroke was a Tuesday. A hauler's route log, subpoenaed later, confirmed the pickup, but before that, an employee at the transfer station remembered something odd from that week: bags of shredded paper from the Marina account. Dense, heavy, more than any office produces in a normal month. And when June's forensic accountant finally pried loose what bank records we could reach, a shape emerged. The Marina's copies of its own books had gaps, 3 specific years missing, and those years lined up with a county dredging contract, a big one, where the money that came in could not be fully matched to the money that went out. Somewhere in the 6 figures, the trail just fogged over. My father, who counted cleats and shackles his whole life, who could tell you the fuel margin from memory, had finally sat down with those years. That's what I believe he was holding when he confronted his brother. That's what I believe was being fed into a shredder while he lay on the floor. I couldn't prove the shredding yet. But I could test the timeline on the one person who'd repeated it in good faith. I found bread at the boat launch and I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just asked him to tell me the story again, the way his dad told it. He did. His father stopped by the office around 9, found Walt down, called the ambulance immediately. 9 o'clock. Then I set my phone on the gunnel between us and pressed play. 41 seconds. His father's name in my father's ruined voice. When it ended, I said one sentence. That message hit my phone at 7:48. I watched my cousin's face do the math, watched the color go out of it, watched him look at the water because looking at me had gotten too expensive. He didn't defend it. He didn't apologize for it either. He picked up his gear and left without a word, and I let him go, because June had taught me something about pressure: you don't crank a winch line to breaking. You take up the slack and you wait. Denny felt the line tighten. I know he did, because a week later he invited me to breakfast at the Anchor Diner, all warmth, reading glasses on the cord, and gave the performance of his life. Family shouldn't do this to each other. Lawyers only get rich when brothers go to war. He slid a folder across the table. A family settlement, $200,000, my father's care professionally managed, everything else released. Everything withdrawn, everything signed away, everyone friends again. He even let his voice crack. He was good. If I hadn't heard the voicemail, I might have believed the crack. What Denny didn't know is that Washington has rules about recording, and June had made sure my attorney set the meeting up so that every word was lawfully on the record. So when I said, slowly and clearly, you want me to sign a release for the Marina, the house, the accounts, and my father's guardianship, in exchange for money, and Denny said, that's the smart version of this, honey, that sentence stopped belonging to him. It belonged to the case. I told him no. He smiled like a man being patient with a child. And the smile was the truest thing he showed me all morning. Afterward, June flagged the next problem. Timelines and bank gaps were powerful, but a jury-proof account of that night needed one thing we didn't have: the office itself, the hours between 7:48 and 8:56. And the office had cameras. My father's old DVR system, the one he'd installed after the fuel thefts, the unit I'd seen blinking on the shelf through the window the day I found the locks changed. When June sent a preservation demand for the footage, Denny's lawyer answered that no recording system existed on the premises. It was Brett who gave it to me, and he didn't even know he was doing it. He came by my slip a few days later, the timeline eating at him. Though he wouldn't say so, and in the middle of defending his father he said it. Dad's not hiding anything, Casey. Hell, after the stroke he finally cleaned that office out. Had me haul the junk down to the fuel dock, that old dead DVR, cables, all of it, and pitch it over the side. It was garbage. It had been garbage for years, over the side. Off the fuel dock. Into 30 feet of water and silt, where paper rots and memories drown and most things are gone forever, most things. But my uncle had made one mistake a bookkeeper would never catch and a salvage diver never misses. He didn't destroy the drive. He just sank it. And sinking something doesn't put it beyond reach. It just puts it in my world. I planned it the way I'd plan any recovery job, because that's what it was. I pulled tide tables and picked a night with a minus tide and almost no current. I studied the fuel dock from my own slip-through binoculars, where a man standing at the rail would naturally throw something heavy, how far a box full of steel would carry, where 2 years of silt and storm surge would walk it along the bottom. June was blunt about the legal side. The harbor floor below the tide line wasn't Denny's property, and everything had to be documented like it was already an exhibit. So at 11 on a cold, moonless Tuesday, my deckhand Tomas stood watch on the dock with a camera and a log sheet. June sat in her car with a thermos, and I went over the side, 31 feet down. The world was the brown-green murk from the beginning of this story, my flashlight beam dying 8 inches out, my knees in mud my father's life was built over. You don't search silt with your eyes. You search it with your hands, in arcs, on a pattern line, breathing slow because panic burns air and air is time. First pass, nothing but a boot, a paint can, 40 years of dropped tools. Second pass, my glove found the rotted mesh of a sunken crab pot, and when I worked around it, my knuckles hit something square. Metal corners. A housing. I fanned the silt away and put my light against it, and through the murk I could just read the raised letters on the casing lid. The same brand as the monitor I'd seen blinking on my father's shelf. I bagged it, rigged the lift bag, and sent it up slow. It broke the surface at 1:52 a.m., and Tomas photographed everything, the bag, the timestamp, my gloved hands, the serial plate, before the box ever touched the dock. June logged it, sealed it, and drove it that same night to a data recovery lab in Tacoma that handles fire and flood drives. Chain of custody, unbroken, dock to lab. The technician's assessment was careful. Saltwater intrusion, corrosion on the board, platters possibly salvageable, possibly not. Weeks, not days. No promises, so we waited, and while we waited, my uncle made his second big mistake. Somebody at the courthouse must have mentioned that Sandra Teague had been served a subpoena, because Denny drove to Ridgeline and stood on her porch. I learned all this later, reminding her, in his warm, reasonable voice, how easy it is for a mobile notary to lose her commission over one clerical complaint. He thought he was closing a hatch. He was opening one. 2 days later, Sandra Teague walked into June's office holding a canvas tote bag, sat down without being asked, and said, "He came to my house." Then she laid her notary journal on the desk. Notaries keep sequential logs of every act, and there it was, the entry for my father's power of attorney, squeezed into the margin between 2 entries from the correct year. In different ink, cramped and guilty as a confession. She'd notarized it last October, after the stroke, and backdated it 14 months because Denny, her steady client of 20 years, stood over her shoulder and told her it was just cleaning up paperwork the family had already agreed to. "I knew," she said, and her hands were shaking. I told myself I didn't. But I knew. Denny felt the deck tilting. And a cornered bookkeeper doesn't swing, he liquidates. Within a week, June's contact at the county recorder flagged a purchase and sale agreement, Tidegate Holdings LLC selling the Marina to something called Pacific Crest Waterfront Partners, an out-of-state developer with a taste for condos. Quiet sale, quick close. And the same week, Cedar Pines notified me that the responsible party had authorized my father's transfer to their locked memory care wing. Limited visitation. For his safety. My father did not have dementia. He had a brother. My attorney filed everything at once, an emergency injunction to freeze the sale, a challenge to the transfer, and a demand to expedite the guardianship hearing. The judge granted the freeze pending hearing and pinned it all to one court date, 6 weeks out. Everything, the Marina, the sale, my father's freedom, the guardianship, now came down to a single morning. Two things carried me through those weeks. The first was an hour with my father. Marisol had been working with him quietly, on her own time, with a laminated letterboard, a simple grid of the alphabet he could point to with his good left hand. She set it on his tray, and I asked him something easy, something safe. I asked if he remembered my boat. His finger moved. Slow. Deliberate. S-E-A. He rested, breathing hard, and kept going. O-A-T-T-E-R-C Otter. The tug he'd helped me buy at auction 11 years ago, the one he'd said was too much boat for me and then bragged about to everyone on the dock. I laughed and cried at the same time, and my father, half his face still, half of it fighting, got his crooked smile up onto the working side. He was in there. All of him. He'd been in there the whole time. The second thing, I didn't learn until later. Brett drove past the Marina one of those nights, the way you drive past the places that raised you, and his headlights swept across a sign zip-tied to the fence his grandfather's brother had strung chain link on 40 years ago. Sale pending. His father had never said a word to him about it. Brett sat in his truck at that gate for a long time, and whatever he'd been holding together since the day I played him the voicemail finally came apart quietly, the way lines part, not with a bang, but one strand at a time. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, standing in the chandlery with a basket of shackles, I got the call from Tacoma. The technician's voice was flat, professional, and underneath it, just slightly electric. Most of the drive was gone, he said. Corrosion took the exterior cameras, the fuel dock, the yard, but one camera's file system had survived intact. The office interior. And the recovered folder was date-stamped September 30th. The hearing fell on a gray morning in early June, 8.5 months after my father went down on that office floor. The county courtroom smelled like carpet cleaner and rain jackets, and half of Harlow Bay found a reason to be there. I wore no uniform, because I don't have one. I wore the blazer I bought for my mother's funeral, and I sat still. The way you sit when the weather's coming and there's nothing left to do but let it arrive. Denny testified first, and he was magnificent. I'll give him that forever. Reading glasses on the cord, voice cracking at the right places, a brother worn thin by love. His attorney walked him through it, the years of quiet service, the niece who was always somewhere else, the terrible night he found Walt on the floor and rode in the ambulance holding his hand. He never looked at me while he said it. He looked at the judge, at the gallery, at the town, but the ground under him was already moving. The court-appointed guardian ad litem, the neutral investigator whose whole job was my father's interests. Nobody else's, had filed her report, and it was quietly devastating. She noted that the ward tracked visitors, followed conversation, and responded consistently through assisted communication. She noted that the guardianship petition predated the family's notification of the ward's daughter by 2 days. She used the word inconsistencies 4 times. Then Sandra Teague took the stand with her canvas tote bag, laid her notary journal on the rail, and told the truth in a voice that got stronger as she went. She had notarized the power of attorney in October, after the stroke, not the previous August, as the certificate swore. She had backdated it because Dennis Merritt, her client of 20 years, stood at her kitchen counter and told her it was paperwork the family had already agreed on, and because he mentioned, gently, how easily a mobile notary loses her livelihood. The forensic document examiner followed her and testified that the signature was a tracing, even pen pressure, hesitation marks in the long strokes, consistent with an exemplar being copied by another hand. Then my cousin was called. And the room went very quiet, because everyone in it knew whose son he was. Brett had come to my attorney 2 weeks earlier, on his own, on a rainy Sunday, and said one sentence, "I can't carry this into a courtroom for him." Now he sat in the witness chair, hands flat on his knees, and answered every question without decoration. His father had told him he found Walt at 9 o'clock. Later, his father told a neighbor it was closer to 8. 2 timelines from the same man about the same night. And yes, after the stroke, at his father's instruction, Brett had personally thrown the office DVR off the fuel dock. He'd been told it was dead junk. He looked at the floor when he said it, and then he did the hardest thing I've ever watched a person do in public. He looked up at his father and said, "You told me it didn't record anymore, Dad." Why would it matter where dead junk landed? Denny didn't answer. Denny was watching my attorney wheel a television toward the bench. The footage ran without narration, because it didn't need any. Grainy, gray, time-stamped. At 7:46 p.m., my father crosses the office holding a ledger book, jabbing his finger at an open page, his shoulders squared at his brother. At 7:48, mid-sentence, his hand goes to his head. He staggers against the desk, fumbles his phone from his shirt pocket, that's the voicemail, that's my 41 seconds, and goes down. The phone skids. And then the part one will never be able to unsee. Denny stands over him. Not frozen. Not panicking. Deciding. He picks the ledger up off the floor. He crosses to the shredder in the corner, and for the next 63 minutes, in silence, its little red light blinking in the gloom. He feeds pages into it, sheet after sheet, stepping around his brother's body like a man stepping around a coil of rope. At 8:51 he carries bags out the door. At 8:56, he picks up the office phone. Nobody in that courtroom made a sound. Somewhere behind me a woman was crying, and I think it was someone who had pulled her boat from our yard, and then came the moment the whole fight had been for. Over his attorney's objections, capacity, reliability, prejudice, the judge allowed it, because the Guardian ad litem's report supported it and because the entire question before the court was whether this man had a mind of his own. My father came forward in his chair, Marisol on one side. His court-approved speech therapist on the other, the letterboard on his tray. The courtroom had seen footage of him on the floor. Now it watched him sit up straight, white-haired and half-paralyzed and absolutely present. The judge asked her questions directly, slowly, and my father answered with his good left hand, one letter at a time, the therapist reading each one aloud. Did he understand where he was? Why, yes. Did he sign a power of attorney giving his brother authority over his affairs? The finger moved, deliberate as a tide. Never. The therapist said the word into the silence, and it landed like a dropped anchor. And when the judge asked who he wanted making decisions about his life, my father didn't hesitate. Casey. Then he kept going, fighting for every letter while the whole room held its breath. Mygirl. I did not cry quietly. I'm telling you that because everything else in this story is true, so that should be too. The ruling took 20 minutes. Guardianship denied. The power of attorney declared void as a forgery, and with it every downstream transfer, the LLC, the deeds, the accounts, all of it unwound. The pending sale to Pacific Crest Waterfront Partners, dead on the table. A less restrictive support arrangement ordered, with me as my father's designated agent, per his stated wish. And the judge, in a voice with no warmth left in it, referred the entire record, the forged instrument, the backdated notarization, the destroyed evidence, and what she called the documented 68-minute delay in summoning emergency aid, to the county prosecutor, Denny's hands. Those steady bookkeeper's hands that had balanced 40 years of columns, were trembling on the table rail. Not with rage. With self-pity, you could see it settle over him like weather, the astonishment of a man who still believed he was the wronged party. The judge saw it too. I watched her see it. The gallery emptied slowly, the way it does after something people will talk about for years. I was gathering my coat when he crossed the aisle, smaller somehow. The cord of his reading glasses crooked, and stopped an arm's length away. Brett moved toward us and Denny held up a hand without looking at him. 1 minute, he said to me. That's all I'm asking. Alone. At the Marina, I gave him his minute. I don't fully know why. Maybe because after 8.5 months of paper and process, I wanted to hear what the man would say when there was no judge, no gallery, no performance left to give. We stood at the end of the main float 2 evenings later, the tide near slack, The water gone still and pewter-colored the way it does when it can't decide which way to run. Denny looked out at the boats instead of at me, and when he finally talked, his voice was quiet and reasonable, and that was the terrible part. 40 years, Casey. 40 years I sat at that desk. Every slip fee, every tax season, every winter the books almost didn't balance and I made them balance. Your dad poured the concrete and shook the hands and got his name on the sign. The town loves a builder. Nobody loves a bookkeeper. He turned his glasses over in his fingers. When your grandmother died, she left him the waterfront lot and left me a rocking chair. Did you know that? A chair. And I still showed up Monday morning. Everything I took, I'd already earned 3 times over. I just finally collected, and here's what I'll admit, for about 10 seconds. Standing there in the smell of creosote and low tide, I could almost see it his way. That's what made him dangerous his whole life. Denny's stories always balanced, like his ledgers. As long as you didn't audit them, I let him finish completely. Then I said the only thing I'd come to say, 68 minutes. He was on the floor, saying your name, and you fed paper into a shredder and stepped over him. Whatever the town owed you, whatever grandma owed you, whatever dad owed you, he didn't owe you that. I looked at him, and for the first time since this began, he looked old to me. You didn't collect a debt, Denny. You took his voice so he couldn't call yours in. He started to answer. I didn't stay for it. I walked up the float, and the sound of my own boots on the planks was the whole rest of the conversation. Some people you beat by fighting. Denny, you beat by leaving him alone with his math. The charges came down 5 weeks later. Forgery. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Tampering with evidence. The prosecutor looked hard at the 68 minutes too, but proving criminal neglect to that standard is its own mountain, and in the end Denny's lawyers negotiated. He pleaded to the forgery and the exploitation. Restitution first, the accounts the LLC had drained came clawing back through a court-appointed receiver, dollar by dollar, the way tide comes back over a flat. There would be a sentencing hearing, and the victim's family would have the right to speak. I declined. People in town didn't understand it. But I'd already said my piece on a dock at Slackwater, and my father, asked through the letterboard whether he wanted to submit a statement, spelled out 2 words the attorney read into the record exactly as given, my brother. Nobody could ever decide if it was an accusation or an epitaph. I think it was both, and I think Denny will spend the rest of his life deciding too. Brett didn't go to the sentencing either. He hasn't spoken to his father since the hearing. That's not a thing I asked for, and not a thing I celebrate, because I know exactly what it costs to be estranged from a parent while the clock runs. He showed up at the Marina on a Saturday in July with his own work gloves and a flat of coffee, and he didn't ask permission, and I didn't offer any speeches. He started replacing deck boards on the North Float. He's been showing up ever since. Some apologies are made out of lumber. The sale pending sign came off the fence in June. I cut the zip ties myself and let a couple of the old-timers watch me do it, because in a small town, some things need witnesses. The boat owners drifted back one by one, most of them too embarrassed to say why they'd left, and I learned to let them off the hook, because holding a whole town accountable is a full-time job and I already had one, too, actually. Because I changed how I work. The long-haul contracts, the 3-week runs up the coast, I pass most of those to other crews now. The Sea Otter works close to home these days, harbor jobs, day jobs. I used to think staying near shore was the thing that would sink me. Turns out I'd just never had a reason to hold position. My father came home in September, 11 months after his brother locked him out of his own life. Home to the Marina house, with a wheelchair ramp Brett built and an aide who comes mornings, and a speech therapist twice a week. His recovery is real and it is partial, and I've made peace with both halves of that sentence. Words come back to him the way salvage comes off a bottom, slowly. With effort, the important pieces first. Names before sentences. Marisol, who visits on her days off. Brett. The Sea Otter, which he still pronounces like a man bragging, last month, on an evening with the tide at dead slack, I wheeled him out to the end of the rebuilt North Float. The water was glass, diesel and salt and somebody's radio down the dock. He watched the boats for a while, and then he reached over with his good left hand, took hold of my wrist the way he did that first day at Cedar Pines, and worked his jaw around the word he'd been fighting toward for a year: Casey, clear. Whole. Mine. People think this story is about a marina, because that's what the court documents say it was about. But I went 31 feet down into black water for a box, and what I actually brought up was this: an evening, a dock, my name in my father's voice. The rest was just weight to be lifted. That's the thing about salvage work, the thing my father taught me without ever saying it. The dark doesn't get to keep what belongs to you. Not if you're willing to go down after it.